Well, good morning. I'd like to call to order the Lee County Board of County Commissioners Zoning and Comprehensive Plan Amendment hearing for March 8th, 2023. Let's begin this morning with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You may be seated. And at this time, I'd like to recognize our Department of Community Development staff for the first item. Good morning.
Good morning, Commissioners. Dirk Danley will present the first case to the Commissioner.
Commissioners, good morning. Dirk Danley, Lee County Zoning. We have 4 cases before you today. There's 3 zoning cases and 1 CPA. The first case before you is DCI 2021-41. This is Appaloosa Lane CPD. This is a request to rezone approximately 5.17 acres from special commercial office district to commercial plan development to allow for 140 room hotel with 30,000 square feet of commercial uses, or an alternate to allow for an additional 30,000 square feet if the hotel is not built. The hearing examiner did recommend approval with conditions, and there were no participants of record. Staff and the applicant are here with any questions you may have.
Very good. Commissioners, do you have any questions for our staff at this time?
I do.
Commissioner Pendergrass?
Sure. Good morning. What is it currently? I know it's a parking lot now. It used to be, I think, going to be used for a private school. What does it currently have zoning for now, the current use now?
So the special commercial office district has like a limited series of commercial uses that would be allowed, certain types of business service type uses. The school that was there previously, that would also be permitted again today, but it's relatively limited in scope. The rezone to commercial plan development was to allow for some more retail uses and additionally the hotel use that wasn't permitted in the special commercial office district.
And how many, does it say how many square foot then based upon the current zoning and or units?
The current zoning doesn't necessarily have a limitation on the square footage overall. It's just based on what they are able to fit with typical zoning districts. So your setbacks, your lot coverage, and maximum height of 35 feet, just based off of what the code would allow today.
Okay, great, thank you.
Great, thank you. Any commissioners, any further questions for our staff at this time? Okay, seeing none, I'd like to ask, does the applicant wish to make a presentation? Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Fred Drovlik from RVI Planning, representing the owner, VRL Toter. I don't have a presentation here today. I just wanted to come up and say that we agree with the hearing examiner recommendation. We look forward to a reuse of this property to what we think is more of an accurate scope of services for this area, and I'm here for questions.
Very good. Anybody have questions for the applicant at this time? Okay, thank you very much. We have no participants of record, commissioners, so at this time, does somebody wish to make a motion?
I make a motion to approve. And I'll second.
Okay, the motion for approval is from Commissioner Greenwell and the seconds from Commissioner Sandelli. Any further discussion on this item? No? Are there any objections? No objections. That motion carries unanimously.
Okay, the second case before you today is DCI 2021-00026, the homes at 81 West RPD. The request is to rezone approximately 10 acres from agricultural to residential plan development to allow for a maximum of 90 single-family detached and attached homes. The hearing examiner did recommend approval with conditions. There were 2 participants of record, and staff and the applicant are here with any questions that you may have.
Very good. Any questions for our staff at this time, commissioners?
No.
Okay, seeing none, then at this time we'll call up the applicant. Do you wish to make a presentation?
Good morning, Neil Montgomery for the record. I don't have a presentation. I know there's 2 people here. If you have questions after they speak, I'd like to be able to respond to those, but we agree with the staff and the hearing examiner that recommended approval.
Very good. Any questions for the applicant at this time, commissioners? Okay, very good. At this time, I'll call the participants of record. The first is Samantha DuPont, followed by David Richards. Good morning.
Good morning, Commissioner Allen. Commissioners, how many minutes do I have? I have like 3?
We do 5 at this zone.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm going to try to be as clear as I can because I live off Penzance, 7021 Penzance. I own a lot, 7041, so that's why I got the notice, because I owned the lot, but I didn't get it from my house. So we were only two to show up at the hearing examiner, and we're pretty proactive in our neighborhood and actually got to know a lot of our neighbors from this development. And now we're asking you as our elected officials to actually listen to us in our plea that although the hearing examiner said it is compatible for density-wise, it is not for rental-wise. I mean, this is what the problem is. And we are asking you to actually listen to us to fight for our property rights. We're asking you to keep this, to actually send this project back because this is a rental community, will impact our property value, but also we're asking you for our peace, our safety, for our environment, and again, our property value. I mean, 90 units on basically 6 acres built because it's on 9 acres, between 9 and 10 acres, and they have this retainage ponds and compacting this rental townhomes that is a concept from New York, Michigan. They're bringing here in our Southwest Florida. Again, the notices were limited. I mean, lost in the mail, not getting it. Timbers didn't get it, and I think a lot of you are familiar with the Timbers community. They were pretty vocal the last time with the wind song. And turned out Neil community did a great job with the wind song. Now, what we, shoving this 90 units, 90 townhomes, I mean, I get it. You know, I sent it to all our neighbors. We have it. But at the time of the future land map, which said, okay, it will be urban. Well, that was 35 years ago. We are asking you to send this back and have some fresh eyes to look at the infrastructure to the property owners, us, who actually live there, have average value of $500,000, $600,000 homes. Now you're going to have 90 rental townhomes on Penzance. I never got an answer of how much those homes will be rented for. Surely not $5,000 or $6,000 a month. And then we have the whole debacle into the states, the same thing. Property owners are tired of having those rental communities shoved, into the residential, privately owned residential area. And with all due respect, Commissioner Hammond, you actually were quoted in the Business Observer. This is a balancing act between compatibility, which is not compatible for privately owned residents, and it's a high density. The average density in this neighborhood is actually 6, and this will be to about 9, 10, and balancing the compatibility with respect to our property right. This is what we're asking for. All the projects, usually they get voted, oh, okay, that's it. And God bless our last commissioner, Frank Mann. I was a Rotarian with him for years. Love Frank Mann. He was fighting that. And I'd love to see Southwest Florida not becoming the New York, Michigan, shove it, the rental into our community that is close-knit. And have you guys that we elected to actually revisit that future land map and have fresh eyes, not 25 years engineer doing the same thing. I get it. I'm a CPA, I have degrees of the yang-yang, click, 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 click. No, we don't want that. We want somebody with the fresh eyes to look at that area and not turn it into the armpit of Southwest Florida. This is my plea, and hopefully answer most. I see some of our neighbors showed up, and I appreciate they did, because they did not know about it. And I think that's it. I appreciate your time.
Appreciate you too.
Thank you.
At this time, I'd like to call David Richards.
Morning.
Morning.
So I am one of the residents that live on Blasington Road, and I realize you guys are going to let this project go through or something similar to it, but I have a problem with the entryway. So the entryway on this is on Blasington Road. Blasington Road's a private road. There's 10 houses on this road. It goes all the way down. It is a dead end. For you guys to have the main entrance to this project and an emergency entrance within 500 feet of each other on the same road that is a private road that the traffic is going to go to Penzance anyway doesn't seem to make sense. There's no other alternative. You can't go down the road and cheat and go another direction. Every car that's in this development is going to hit Penzance. And it's going to hit Penzance at the end of a private road as opposed to a nicely set up entry and exit way for a community. Doesn't make sense. All the neighborhood people, they ride our bikes and stuff down the neighborhood. They exercise their hunting buggies. They ride their four-wheelers. The neighborhoods that are next to us, they actually have their kids come over there in cars and teaching them how to drive on our road. It's very rural, very private. And to have this community be there and have 10 times the traffic on it every day, stacking up at the end of our road at the stop sign, just doesn't seem to make sense. So I'm asking, just because the Land Development Code checked a box saying that this is a major collector, which Penzance now is, now all of a sudden you have to seek a different way to get on the road, but you're not getting a different way to get on the road because you're getting on Penzance anyway. So there's several communities that are in this area, all within 100 yards, and they all access Penzance. So you got the Timbers, Windsong, Heritage Palm, Coral Wood, Cypress Wood, Cypress Walk, all of those access Penzance. It doesn't make any sense for you to put a hardship on our road to have them access our road just when they're going to hit Penzance anyway. And it's literally 25 yards worth of road. It doesn't seem to make common sense. And so I'm asking you to take a look at that and redirect this, because the original project, when the original project started, the developer had it on Penzance. And the county said, wait a minute, because now the box got checked that it's a major collector, we have to have a different entrance. So common sense went out the window, and now it went to Blasington Road. And I just don't think it's the common sense way to do it. And we also have a drainage problem, and they haven't addressed this, but like I said, this is a rural road. We had the road paved, and when the road was being paved, the neighbors got together and put a pipe underneath the road for drainage, but we don't know that that's a correct pipe or anything. There's 2 other communities being built down the road. By the way, both of them have emergency entrances only on Blasington, and they're not even allowed to use Blasington for construction as written in on their land development codes. So the point I'm trying to get at is the community is probably out of place. We don't know whether it's going to drain. The engineer from the community that's being built down south came up and looked at the road, came up and looked at the pipe underneath the road and the drainage, which goes through Windsong now. And they decided that the project wouldn't handle their water, so they sent the water south as part of their development. And now this one is going in the same ditch that the other guys said won't handle it. Just those 2 things are troublesome, and I believe that if you guys take a closer look at it, you'll think that they're out of position. So that's it.
Thank you for your
Thank you.
That concludes our participants of record for today's case. At this time, I'd like to call the applicant back up to answer the concerns that were raised. Specifically, if you could talk about the access.
Yeah, on the access on Penzance, he's correct. The original site plan that was submitted with the application did show access to Penzance. He is also correct that the county changed the designation of the road while we were in the application process and designated it a major collector. At that point in time, the regulations don't allow direct access onto the road. So in order to comply with the county's regulations, it was shifted. They have a legal right to use the road. So he's right, but we're following the rules. Staff and the hearing examiner are following the rules. So that's the situation with the access. The drainage, he's sort of correct, but not exactly correct. The project to the south was originally designed, it was the Lennar project you approved recently, and it did go drain through the middle of the Windsong project. There's a major conveyance there. This gentleman and another gentleman raised concerns, and due to the location of that project, it was able to ameliorate their concern to shift the drainage to the south and take it along 6 Mile. The testimony at the hearing by Mr. Feeney, the engineer who's here, was this property doesn't have the ability to shift the direction of the flow. The historic flow is toward essentially plantation into the major ditch or conveyance under plantation over to the canal. So the environmental resource permit was issued in this case. The hearing examiner report notes that the ERP was issued and that Mr. Feeney did consider and address his concerns. So inasmuch as the drainage has been approved and inasmuch as there's no way else for it to go, I appreciate his concern, but we can't shift it and send it some way it doesn't naturally go. And in regard to the surrounding uses, well, first, the concern about it being a rental community, the county's not allowed to discriminate based on the form of ownership. The hearing examiner did consider the densities. The projects immediately to the east are at 7+ and 8+ units per acre. You've got some other projects just to the south on 6 Mile that are 12+. So she notes that the surrounding densities are 3 to 13 and referenced this exhibit, which you can't see, that was in the applicant's presentation that shows what all the surrounding densities are. And it was determined, obviously, since this property is in central urban, that it is consistent with the future land use plan and compatible with the changing neighborhood. Did you have any other questions?
Commissioners, any other questions for, yes, Commissioner Pendergrass?
I have a few. So if based upon the county standards changing the exit onto the side road, the private road, who's going to maintain that road from your entrance to Penzance?
That's a good question. The answer is, first off, the county is going to require them at DO stage to bring the road up to county standards from wherever they access it up to Penzance.
So the applicant would have to pay for that? Okay.
Yes, sir.
And again, thank you for not, first of all, going to the city Fort Myers and getting more density. So I see it's cities across the street, that's why we have more density across the street, that's the city Fort Myers. So thank you and the owner for not reaching out and trying to go to the city to ruin the neighborhood even more by adding more units. But my question, I guess, is staff as far as the access to the road. What's the process of getting it back on Penzance to take the private road out of the equation? Would that be a land development change? Since we require this since that's the collector road now?
To kind of address it briefly, since it's a requirement of Land Development Code, 10285 says that if it's a major collector road, you can't access it with alternatives available. So Blasingame being the alternative, that's the standard in the Land Development Code. To deviate from that, it would be a process of getting a deviation from the Land Development Code, and with that, we'd probably seek advice from DOT, since they're the ones that grant access to public roads. And I think at the point that this came into play during this review, it was DOT that made note that this designation had changed and they were looking to not have that access. I can't speak for what's there today, but I think that's the process that took place during the review that made the access point change.
Thank you. And just for my colleagues, understand this area, if you're not familiar with this area, you may be, but this area has changed over the years. It went from ranchette, acreage lot. Obviously, this owner decided to sell their property and increase the density, obviously for financial gain. And now it's changed the whole aspect of the community, and that's what we're running into in prior cases and the one here today. So like I told the attorney, thank you for not reaching out, because this is across the street from the city, where the city is currently now working with Stock and other attorneys and trying to access annex more properties into the city to get more density. So we're going to continue see this change of culture as far as the density increases along that border there. So,
Commissioners, any other questions or comments? No? I had a question real quick for our county attorney's office then. Could we approve that deviation today to put the access back on Penzance?
In order to do that, there's some testimony that need to be provided to demonstrate compliance with the deviation requirements. If you would like, I know we did this last time, I know it can be remanded to the hearing examiner to address the deviation requirements and make sure that you have the common substantial evidence to support that, and also give the applicant the time to shift their site plan, because it would need to be amended. That way they can get it all approved at once without having to come back.
So if I hear what you're saying correctly, then, you're saying we could remand it back to the hearing examiner with the specific purpose of putting the access back on, examining the deviation that would put the access back on Penzance?
Correct.
And then it would come back to us at a future date?
That's correct.
Okay. Ms. Montgomery, we'll hear from you. Go ahead.
I appreciate where you're going, but we've been in the process for a year and a half. That's another 6 to 9 months. That's a long time to be in the process and not be able to move forward. If there's a way for the staff to consider the same criteria administratively, we'd be happy to do that, but another 6 to 9 months is painful at this point.
Thank you. Commissioner Pendergrass.
I think for the applicant, I understand obviously time is important, but I think this is a road that's going to be there forever. I think we have to be understanding that. And also, wouldn't it be more financial feasible for the applicant with a site plan if the access was on Penzance instead of bringing the road up to county standards and maintaining that road thereafter?
I'm not the expert, so.
For the record, sir, my name is Frank Feeney. I'm the engineer of record for the project. The access point that we have currently designed is, again, in accordance with what the staff is wanting to do as far as what's required. The entrance point, if we put it onto Penzance Boulevard, would allow us direct access and avoid some of these issues. Would it be better versus what we have on Penzance? I think that you're going to see some improvements that would have to be done on Penzance in order to support that may or may not be any better as far as the drainage aspect that's coming through there and traffic aspect as well. It may work better as far as traffic responses coming back down into Blazing the way we have it drawn.
You're referring to like a turn lane or something on Penzance?
You'd have to have a turn lane as well as the separation between Blazingham and the entrances to the adjacent properties. You have to look at that as well as far as the distance separation.
Right, but leaving it on the side private road where it's currently ranchette-style homes is basically a private road, you're going to have to do a lot of improvements there too.
Yes, sir.
You're going to affect the traffic of those residents. So either way, I'm not going to support the current project as it is. I was just giving you an opportunity to come forward. I'm only one vote, but I wasn't going to support it with the entrance on the side road. But if you had an opportunity to go to Penzance, just trying to throw that out there to you. I know it's time, but again, that's your choice. So.
Mr. Jacob?
Commissioners, just want to provide, the administrative code provides a time frame for remand that would have to be brought back to the hearing examiner and brought back to you in an efficient time. Seeing them down there on the other end, we can try to work on a truncated time schedule to deal with the deviation. And I don't know the individual's name, I forget it, but he is correct. You probably have to also deal with the deviation for separation of the access points, but all that could be done not 6 to 9 months. The administrative code wouldn't allow that anyway.
Could you suggest what that motion would look like?
Yes, the motion would be to remand the case back to the hearing examiner's office to hold a hearing, I'm going to say within 30 days, to address the deviations necessary to move the access point onto Penzance.
Does somebody wish to make that motion?
I gladly will.
Okay, we have a motion from Commissioner Ruane and a second from Commissioner Sandelli. Do we have any discussion on the motion? Okay, seeing no discussion, I'll call the question. Are there any objections?
I object.
Okay, the motion carries 4-1. Commissioner Pendergrass objects.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. All right, our next case, please introduce the Pine Island Road CPD case.
Morning, Commissioners. My name is Beth Workman. I'm with the zoning section. Here before you today is DCI 2021-00029. It is 3640 Southwest Pine Island Road, Commercial Plan Development. The property is located south of Pine Island Road. The request is to rezone 1.4 acres from agricultural, AG2, to Commercial Plan Development, CPD. The applicant is requesting to allow a maximum 2,000 square foot building with some office, small retail, with a primary use of vehicle dealership to sell cars and rent vehicles for tourist use. It should be noted that there was a comprehensive plan amendment that is effective today that switched the property from the rural future land use category to commercial. And it also should be noted that the property is within the Pine Island Planning District, but is not within the Greater Pine Island Community Plan area, according to map 2A of the Lee Plan. It also should be noted that in the recommendation from the hearing examiner, zoning staff worked with code enforcement staff because there are 4 violations on this property, and condition 4 has the code enforcement conditions to abate the 4 violations. Whether this goes through with approval on rezoning, or if it does not, there are conditions in there for either way to abate the violation to work with the owner of the property. There were 3 participants of record. The hearing examiner recommended approval. Staff and the applicant are here for questions.
Very good. At this time, commissioners, do you have any questions for our staff? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and call on the applicant.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning. Once again, my name is Fred Drovlik. I'm a planner with RVI Planning, representing the owner, Ted Allen. On this property, also with me is Jim Inc. He's a civil engineer on the plan or on the project, and Yuri Biko from TR Transportation, in case there was a transportation-related question. I don't have a formal presentation. I'll just stick with this site plan, but I do have a few points of discussion to lay out briefly. So one, this was the former Greater Pine Island Chamber of Commerce. It's been in a different state of either unuse or kind of semi-disrepair for quite a number of years. Some of the violations are the responsibility of the Greater Pine Island Chamber of Commerce. The current owner worked with them, and there's an escrow account in place in order to abate those and take care of those violations. The current owner, who's working on being a resident of the Pine Island area, and he's from out of state, did a couple of things that we wouldn't have advised, and then he understood that, well, the permitting is a little different than it is in Indiana, and so he has to do a few extra steps. So he hired Jim Inc. and Civil Engineering to do a development order in order to abate those and take care of those. The development order is in process, as well as the environmental resource permit, in order to bring everything up to current code and to an accurate status, and to abate those violations with a little fill dirt and some pavement that he did to patch up a few holes that should have been done through a permit. So he apologizes for those things to us and has not done anything since then that would cause any more violations. So we're here to kind of really bring this property back up to a standard that works, that's accurate. The current state of it, as far as drainage, stormwater, environmental protection, is really limited. The way it was built years ago wasn't done to full Lee County standards for buffering, stormwater management. It's not a current ERP standard. So that will be, the entire site will be brought up to code and a better protection. There's an existing building now. We put 2,000 square feet. I think the current building is a little under 1,500 square feet. We just gave the owner just a little wiggle room if he wanted to rearrange it. But for the most part, we're greatly limiting the potential use of this site by setting a ceiling of 2,000 square feet. You could obviously fit a much larger building on a site of this size. So we're limiting that use, and the code, if it would be, well, first of all, we know that there's a number of people here that don't like that one particular use on there, which would be the vehicle sales or rental. So that's the point of this is greatly limited. There can't be that much on this site, and then there is additional land development code, supplementary regulations that require additional buffering along Pine Island Road, and additional buffering surrounding the property that would, if it would be a vehicle dealership. We do have a number of deviations that you'll see on that site plan as we go around that in regards to the buffers. What we weren't, those were really to address the uniqueness of the site, that there's an existing building and that it's a very small site. They weren't to circumvent the code requirements. So our plantings and all the requirements that of those are still going to be met. There's just a few distances here and there that we can't meet because of the unique site layout. So we were trying to meet all the buffering. The deviations weren't to not meet those requirements. They were just to address the site. Additionally, we volunteered, well, we were asked by DOT to remove one of the entrances. So this has currently kind of a U-shaped turn and drive lanes in there that have two accesses onto Pine Island Road, which is not great for traffic, especially at that bend if you've been to the site. So now it'll be one access point lined up with the street across the road, make much more sense. And it gets it a little bit away from the trees and the environmentally sensitive area, so you can have a little bit better view shed. So that's the main pieces of it. I'm here for any additional questions, as well as Jim and Yuri are here as well.
Commissioners, any questions for the applicant,
I
Commissioner?
don't have any questions, but some statements, but no questions for the applicant.
Okay, any questions for the applicant at this time? Very good. Typically, I take the public
Absolutely,
comment.
no problem.
Okay,
Absolutely.
very good. Let's call up our three participants of record. We have Aaron Beretta, followed by Allison Pham. Aaron? Okay, I don't see Aaron. How about Allison Pham and then Deborah Swisher Hicks? Morning.
Good morning. I have some papers, if I could share with you, on appendixes, or is that not allowed?
Pause
I didn't have a presentation, but I have documents.
As long as,
It's just maps.
was it maps that were part of the record already?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, if it's part of the record already, we can take a look at it. Sure.
Okay. And mentioned in the last meeting.
Okay, perfect. As long as they were in the last meeting, they can be in this meeting.
Thank you.
Perfect.
I don't. It's all in the record before. So I just have my speech and the appendixes of the maps, which are in the Lee County Code. Yeah. Yeah, of course.
Okay, go for it.
Good morning. Thanks for having me here. My name is Allison Pham. I am a resident of Bokeelia along with my family for the past 7 years. I hope that you have made a visit to Pine Island and understand why I'm here to oppose the proposed car lot. Firstly, I want to address the statement before that the building was not used. That's just false. I was a volunteer at the past Chamber of Commerce as a volunteer for the Mango Mania Fest in 2020. So that building was in use and was up to code up until the point where it was purchased. Secondly, I want to mention that peace and tranquility is what brings people to Pine Island, and that is what we value most. Life on Pine Island mixes country living with the wonders of being surrounded by water, a fragile combination in coastal Florida. Without proper attention, the treasures of this unique place may be obliterated, which is part of the Pine Island Plan. That's a direct quote. The subject property, 3660 Southwest Pine Island Road, used to be our beautiful Pine Island Welcome Center. As an Airbnb superhost to over 150 families visiting Pine Island, this is the front door to Pine Island and should not be a used car lot. First, I want to address the location of this lot in Chapter 3, Article 3, Greater Pine Island of our current municipal code. It states the boundaries of the Greater Pine Island planning community are depicted. In Future Land Use Map 1, which is the first appendix that I've included. A copy of the Greater Pine Island portion of the planning community's map is reproduced in Appendix 1. A legal description of the Greater Pine Island planning community is set forth in Appendix 1, which is appendix in the paper I gave, and includes Matt Lachey, the Chamber of Commerce building, and all lands to the west. So I would assume that the Welcome Center of the Chamber of Commerce building be part of the Greater Pine Island planning as part of our municipal code. Lee County's future land use map up to the year 2035 also establishes that this property should be associated with the Greater Pine Island plan. So I hope to be here to talk about why the code should be representative. I also have environmental concerns. To the west of this property is the Matlacha Aquatic Preserve conservation land, a mix of upland and wetland. The applicant's environmental consultant identified a strip of wetlands along the west boundary of the subject property. The commercial development of this property will have environmental risks to wetland areas, which the LEED plan promises to protect. In section 33-1082, development abutting an aquatic preserve requires 50 feet wide native vegetation buffer for land abutting a aquatic preserve. Next, I want to talk about the owner violations that were mentioned before. The owner has received multiple code violations, one for dumping fill without permit, which is a concern to the wetland on his property, another for allowing someone to set up a barbecue shop, another for allowing a landscape company to operate without proper business permits. So by approving this rezoning, you would not be holding this property owner accountable for his actions and the violations that were committed. I do also want to mention that we just went through a major hurricane and that this property sits on the only road leading out of Pine Island. I understand that traffic is a major concern and that a rental car business may exacerbate our traffic issues. Thinking about additional development in this area will add to the time of evacuation for all people. I do also want to mention about the requested deviations of the owner. They requested 5 deviations pertaining to the right-of-way buffer, landscaping, rear property landscaping, setbacks for vehicles displayed for sale or rent, and intersection separation standards. The hearing commissioner said that the only one that they're not gonna address is the, rear property landscaping. Got like 1 more minute.
Yeah, you do. It's yellow.
Okay, great, perfect. Okay,
Good help.
so setbacks, the rear property landscaping is the one that they're not addressing, but I want to address the rest of the deviations and that I think that they should be to code, especially setbacks for vehicles displayed for sale or rent. Again, this is our welcome center. I do not want to see used car lots in our welcome center in property that's entering Matlacha. I believe the proposed car lot should not be approved in accordance with the Lee County Plan. This property is currently designated Ag 2, and what I suggest it remain. I highly recommend the board to preserve the integrity of this property and our island. To our Board of Commissioners, I hope you will uphold the Lee County Plan to steer the future growth of our county in a sustainable fashion. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the next speaker is Deborah Swisher Hicks.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for having me here today, or allowing me to speak.
Vicki, if you could start the timer, thanks.
I'm sorry?
Go ahead, you're...
Okay. One of my main concerns has to do with the section code 33-1001. The examiner said it's because it's showing on a map, therefore it's okay. It's not part of the Pine Island Plan, although it is very clearly stated, not just by a visual, but actual words that mean something, that the Chamber of Commerce building and all lands to the west, that is clearly indicated that particular building is part of the Pine Island Plan. Doesn't matter what a map says or what color the dot is. It is part of the Pine Island Plan. It was circumvented. It did not go through the proper vetting, and for that reason, I would like it to be rejected, sent back, and reviewed properly. A used car lot is also part of the very opening of Pine Island, of Matlacha, the beauty that is still there, even though the hurricane may have devastated it. It's still a beloved area. And a used car lot, if you've ever seen one, which I know you all have, they're not pretty. They're very, there's a lot of cement, if you're lucky. Otherwise, it's impervious pavements. There's going to be issues with runoff. During the meeting, the applicant's representative stated that they're going to be doing repairs at that particular building. They said it was going to be just minor repairs, but there is no definition of what is minor and what is not. There's going to be a lot of runoff when it comes to cleaning engines. We're talking about a used car lot next to a preserve. So there's going to be oils, greases, grimes, dust from breaks. If you know it has asbestos in it, or at least it used to, I don't know if it still contains. It's going to be washed around. Having that buffer number 4 shrunk is totally inappropriate. We're talking about a environmental area that's next to a preserve, and if you walked around the initial and the original footprint of the building, they included those little bump outs to make it even larger than it should be. They can actually adjust their vision of the used car lot or any type of building that's going to be placed there, or a business. And those are my major concerns. I don't think this should go through. Minimum of rejected and sent back for proper review. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. And that concludes our participants of record. At this time, we will provide the applicant an opportunity to address the concerns. And real quickly, before the applicant talks, or as you make your way up there, I want to give Commissioner Ruane a chance to share his comments that he wanted to share earlier.
Sure, thank you, I appreciate it. I appreciate the applicant obviously going through hiring an environmental consultant, surveying the property. You know, I have reviewed this, and it's not only commercial lands, it's upland, it's wetlands, it's commercial conservation lands, which are wetland. I also appreciate the fact that you're trying to buffer the existing area as best you can, and I do note that obviously you remove one of the exits, and those are all great items that you mitigate. I'm not in favor of this whatsoever. I don't think it's compatible to the area. Really what is there was the Chamber of Commerce. It had some issues, but when you look further down to the east of the property, it's rural. There's a mobile park, home park, and then you have the Greater Pine Island Water Association, which is in a rural area, as well as Pine Island Fire Control. They're both really for public safety. So I really have a problem with the compatibility in the area, and I like the fact that it's in an environmental wetland area. I appreciate the mitigation you tried to do, but I cannot support this applicant whatsoever.
Very good. Does, we do offer time for the applicant to respond to the concerns that were addressed in the public participation. Do you wish to make a rebuttal, or?
Yes, thank you. I do. Again, Fred Drovlik for the record. This item has come up numerous times about being in the Greater Pine Island Community Plan, you know, under the code requirements of Chapter 33 for Greater Pine Island. And it is a confusing subject. I'm not the expert. Staff is the expert, and in the hearing examiner, they stated that it's not in that plan where we would have been required to meet with them. We would have. We weren't trying to circumvent anything. We just it's in this Greater Pine Island community area, but not in the Greater Pine Island Community Plan, which that speaks to. So I understand it is a very confusing way that it's arranged in the code, but we weren't trying to circumvent that, but it was not under those requirements. Not that we wouldn't have done those things. It was brought up about auto repair. Auto repair is not one of the uses that we requested, which is separate from the ancillary auto repair that would be in a vehicle dealership. That kind of repair is just in order to get cars in working order, if they weren't in working order, to get them off-site. So it's the most minor and only in need. It's not an actual service provided by that site, because we didn't request that because of the environmental sensitivity of the area. And then finally, the piece that, so this is an interesting area, and I agree with Commissioner Ruane in many aspects of it. This is a rural stretch of land. It's quickly changing, so it's part of a bunch of annexations and things on the corner of Veterans and Pine Island Road on both sides that are now annexed into the city of Cape Coral, and 25 units an acre and floor area ratio of 3.0. So it's changing, and to a decent extent. There's some of this that can't change. It's in Lee County, but it is in the urban reserve area that you know, could be looked at for further annexation into Cape Coral. We chose to stay in Lee County for this. We wanted to stay in Lee County. It's preferred to work through the system, have Lee County services to the extent we can. So we chose to not annex and go to that extreme that we could have to get like a CC zoning in Cape Coral would have allowed almost anything on this site. So we chose to go through the comp plan amendment to go to commercial, chose to come back as a CPD, limit the site to a pretty decent extent, and it may be limited more than this based on the ERP results. So with that, and then the property next to it is zoned commercially, even though it's in the rural land use category, so it could be just a matter of time. It's either annexed or it comes in for a comp plan amendment to come in for something commercial or for multifamily. So it is an odd area, and I get it. It is a very rural area. We tried to limit this to the greatest extent that financially he could make this property work for the request. So. So I understand the objection, but and that's my rebuttal, and that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much. Very good. And yeah, you have a question? Absolutely.
Approximately how many cars do you plan on having there?
I mean, and it's not a foregone conclusion, although we did the site plan for a vehicle dealership. The owner does have the vehicle dealerships in Indiana. So we showed that site plan because it's the most intensive use that would be on there and require the most buffers. It isn't a foregone conclusion. We did add a few other uses on there and just general even real estate or office uses. But as far as cars, I would say there would probably be no, I mean, it's going to be a mix. It'd probably be like beach buggies and different things and not just,
But motorized, whether
yeah,
it's
so maybe
buggies,
20, 25, or something like
20
that.
to 25. I mean, having certainly been involved in, as an accountant for dealerships, I mean, obviously you have cars that people go to buy and they're not working, so you're going to have to repair them on site to make sure they get repaired. So you can't indicate that there's no possibility you won't be going through some type of repairs to get it to start, to get it off your lot. So I thought I heard you before saying you're not going to do any type of repairs whatsoever. So that's just not consistent with what I know about used car dealerships.
Yeah, I mean, there are repairs to get the car off site. We didn't request auto repair as a separate use, which is much more intense. So we aren't going to have garage bay doors and regular service and that kind of stuff. That's not an option for us based on our schedule.
Commissioners, any further questions for the applicant at this time?
Just some comments.
I have a couple questions, I think it's for staff, though.
Okay, all right, thank you again.
Thank you.
All right, Commissioner Pendergrass, you're recognized, and then Commissioner...
Attorney wants to address.
Oh, okay, let's do that. We'll hear from Michael first, and then we'll go Pendergrass and Sandelli.
Thank you. I just wanted to put on the record that we've received from commissioners and members of the public emails to commissioners with regards to this project over the last 24 hours. I printed out a number of those, almost all of those that I received copies of, and provided those to the applicant so they could have them prior to this meeting. I just want to put that on the record, and also to indicate both to the applicant and anyone present that those aren't part of the record. While he has them to address any issues, that's not actually something that's for today's presentation.
Okay, excellent. Commissioner Pendergrass, you had a question?
Regarding that, I saw emails come through, but I never read the content, so my assistant did a really great job keeping that from me, so I never saw that. So my question is either for Michael or staff, what's the current use of this property, and what could be done with it if this was denied today under the current standards? What could it be used for now?
Right now, it's under AG2, so any of the commercial uses would have to support the AG2 zoning district, which would be more of a rural setting, even though it's in a commercial future land use category.
For example, what type of business would that be?
It could be a limited retail that would support the rural. It could be an ag use. It could be under, it could be a single-family home under the AG2 to meet the density on there. It's very limited commercial because of the AG2. It would have to support the rural.
Would it support any type of business that would currently allow 25 cars to be parked there?
No.
Okay. So that's what that more intense use would come through. Okay, I was just curious. And obviously I respect and will follow the district commissioner's advice on this because we're concerned about the character of the community and the compatibility of it. But my question is, we heard it today from Fred at the podium. You heard Fred was more out, more open and transparent about it than say Neil would be about other issues. You hear the message that's coming. I'm not sure Brian and Kevin may know exactly how far this is from the city of Cape Coral. I think Commissioner Wayne brought up before about the city Cape Coral trying to annex property in, and obviously would change the character of that. So how close is this, or maybe staff can tell me, how close is this to the city of Cape Coral current boundaries, if you personally may know yourself or staff?
It's less than a half a mile.
Okay, so it's not contingent where they could actually, like,
The
next door.
intersection of Pine Island Road and Burnt Store and Veterans is a half mile.
Okay, so
And the
it's not-
city's
not
property,
connected,
yeah.
It's not currently touching like where they're doing like in other parts of the county? Or
No, sir. The
walking door to door,
closest part of the city of Cape Coral is across the street to the northwest, and then less than a half mile to the east, northeast, and then less than a half mile to the east is the city property line.
Why I'm asking is I understand this position. I thank the property owner for trying to come forward and do something with the property. I welcome that. Want them to use the property for something. They're entitled to a use of the property. It's just right now, currently, we have some say of the property where if it's turned over to the city of Cape Coral, we don't know what it's going to look like then. You know, and it's unfortunate property owners have decided to go into higher tax, higher fee areas, but they do that for a financial standpoint. They get more use out of the property. So that's the negative downside of not supporting this. So kind of torn between that because of, but again, they've drawn the line in the sand. This is their choice. They're going to keep doing this. Where at least they're being more transparent, where others are already going door to door with stock development, other developers saying, we'll give you, 100 units for that and a brokerage deal. So at least they're not doing that yet.
I agree.
Real quickly, are we allowed to look at a more widened out aerial view? Because I noticed the map that we have in the record is like really tight.
Yes, you can.
Yeah, could you pull up just Google Maps and show us where it is so that you could see the surrounding area for it, at least?
Let me get out of this. Hang on a second.
And then while she's pulling that up, Commissioner Ruane, Commissioner Sandelli, you wanted to make a comment, and then we'll go to Commissioner Ruane.
Sure. A couple of things. I think anytime someone is looking to change the character of a property, you're hoping that it's done with the right intentions and become a good neighbor with the new use. I think by the mission here, there were some decisions made early on that didn't lend itself to that. But I applaud some of the changes that were made, to try to rectify that. The second thing is, we're all familiar with a used car lot. When you talk about buffering, it's a little bit of a misnomer in the fact that if you're going to put cars there, you want people to see that. How do you buffer at the same time make that visible to those who may want to do that? So the buffering thing is something I'm not really sure that. I think the final thing is that I think the list of approved uses is broad enough that I think there's probably a better use that would be more compatible with the neighborhood. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Commissioner Sandelli. And then Commissioner Ruane?
I just wanted to concur with Commissioner Pendergrass. I mean, the objection that I had earlier was the intensity of what was going to go on there. When you look at the properties and surrounding them, much more urban, there's obviously public facilities helping the area, but there's a lot of wetlands, there's a lot of conservation land there. I'm just really struggling with the compatibility and the intensity of what's going to be utilized there. So that's my objection, and I would like to see something a lot less intensive.
Okay, very good. All right, at this time then, we've had board discussion. It's time to make a motion, I guess, so that we can figure out which direction we're heading. Does anybody wish to make a motion?
Make a motion to turn this down.
Okay, so the motion for denial is from Commissioner Ruane. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Second from Commissioner Sandelli. Mr. County Attorney, I know that we need to make sure we put competent, substantial evidence on the record. So can you help guide us with that part?
Yes, from the standpoint of the request being denied in whole, the issues with regards to compatibility, surrounding area, and also the intensity of the development has been addressed. There's elements of that intensity and competent substantial evidence in the record demonstrating what that intensity is and the surrounding area. So this discussion with regards to the proposed use. Typically, when you deal with incompatibility, you're dealing with lead plan section 5.1.5 and the inclination of putting additional uses or new uses within a residential area or in this area where it is deemed inconsistent with the surrounding uses. And that the conditions of approval, for example, as was addressed with the car dealership, conditions causing buffering and those things would not be appropriate in light of what a used car dealership would be, in that it would be next to impossible to fully buffer that use from being seen while also having that use which is intended to be seen. I don't know how you do that. So from our standpoint, there is substantial evidence on the record to support the finding that the intensity with the schedule of uses that are proposed and ultimately the lack of conditions to address some of those intense uses are also already on the record.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, any further questions, commissioners, then? All right, at this time, seeing no further discussion, are there any objections to the motion? Okay, I see no objections. That motion carries unanimously. All right, thank you very much. All right, our final case for today is the comprehensive plan amendment for Burnt Store Road.
Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you for being here today. For the record, Joe Saraceno from the Planning Section discussing CPA 2021-00009, Burnt Store Road Mixed-Use Development, a privately initiated small-scale amendment. So because this is small scale, remember that is going for adoption today, not for transmittal. The comprehensive plan amendment before you is to change the future land use designation on roughly 35.5 acres from open lands to central urban and wetlands. The amendment would increase the density allowed and increase the allowable uses on the subject property. A concurrent rezoning application is in the early stages of review and is requesting a change to a mixed-use plan development. On the left, we have a map of the existing future land use map, or a depiction of the existing future land use map showing the open lands, and on the right is the proposed future land use map showing the central urban designation as well as the wetlands. The subject property is just east of the City of Cape Coral boundary and from the Burnt Store Marina development, and about a mile south of the Charlotte County line. Some of the surrounding properties, or surrounding area of the property, the City of Cape Coral has began to put forward a future land use designation for their comprehensive plan, which is a high-intensity future land use category that covers parcels adjacent to Burnt Store Road, extending from Van Buren Parkway almost to the northern city limits. The property is within the Yucapán Creek watershed, and Yucapán Creek conveys off-site flows through the property. The conveyance capacity of Yucapán Creek must be maintained in all future development to be compatible to comply with policy 126.1.4. Most of the property is bordered by public lands. To the north and the east is the Yucapán's unit of the Babcock-Webb Wildlife Management Area, managed by Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. To the west is the Charlotte Harbor Preserve, as well as the Charlotte Harbor Buffer Preserve. West across Burnt Store is the Burnt Store Marina and residential community, and south of the property are several vacant parcels. Burnt Store Road itself is being widened from Pine Island Road up to Charlotte County. In the first phase of this widening project is expected to be completed in 2023. That phase is further south near Pine Island Road. An interlocal agreement with Charlotte County allows for water and sewer on the property. Solid waste, fire, EMS, law enforcement, and public schools are also available to serve the subject property. The open lands future land use category describes areas that are extremely remote from public services, and that no longer describes the subject property. The central urban future land use category describes the anticipated development along the Burnt Store Road area. Consistent with Goal 5, this change allows for development that will accommodate the growing population, and consistent with 5.1.2, the proposed development is outside of the coastal high hazard area and is in FEMA flood zone X, which is low risk. To be consistent with goals 123, 125, and 126, the concurrent plan development must address the environmental requirements, particularly with the Yucapin flowway. In conclusion, the surrounding properties support greater development. The surrounding conditions, support greater development. Public facilities are available to serve the property. The request is consistent with the LEED plan. Development on the site must accommodate the Yucapin flowway for future approvals. At the local planning agency meeting, a motion was made to find the project inconsistent with the LEED plan. However, that motion failed and no other motion was made. Staff continues to recommend that the board adopt the proposed amendment as shown in attachment 1, moving it to central urban and wetlands future land use category. And staff also requests that the board direct staff to analyze properties in unincorporated Lee County along Burnt Store in light of the changing conditions to determine if additional changes are appropriate. Staff is available for any questions, and the applicant is on site as well.
Can you do me a favor and pull up that same map on lease spends that we were just looking at with the city of Cape Coral boundaries and all that, but do it for this parcel? Yeah.
Absolutely. This is the parcel that we're looking at here. These two.
You could highlight those two and then zoom back out a little bit, because I wanted to see, I don't know if it allows you to do that. Yeah, there you go. Okay, cool. Thanks. All right, I'll reserve my comments until after I hear the full presentation, but does anybody have any questions for staff at this time? No?
I have a question.
Okay, Commissioner Pendergrass, go ahead.
Staff, I was surprised to see the LPA's motions. I'd like a little bit more of the discussion, like for Ray Blacksmith, Dustin Gardner, and Don Schroeder. Can anybody state what their objections were?
Commissioners, the issue seemed to boil down to today's conditions versus expected future conditions, and that's what we were wrestling with here in terms of the staff recommendations. Because of the changes, there's a lot of property not developed in that part of Burnt Store Road today. But because of the changes that Cape Coral is proposing within their boundaries to intensify development along Burnt Store Road, we took that into consideration in terms of looking at this property just outside the city boundaries as to what's appropriate for the future. The LPA was divided on how to view that.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Greenwood?
If I may, looking at projects like this in the future, we're growing rapidly, and obviously that's one of our cut-through roads. But if you haven't been on Burnt Store in a while, it's just pretty crazy how much it's exploding out there. So whether we like it or not, these are the type of projects and type of land uses that are changing. So I feel like that this is progress, and these are the things that are going to come in front of us, and this just seems to be one of those issues where people wrestle with the fact whether we should try to control growth or stop growth. But unfortunately, if you look at that corridor, the corridor's changed. It's not rural anymore. It's exploding out there, and it's going to continue to do that. So we have to understand that.
Yeah, again, I want to have a discussion, because I do have some thoughts I want to share with y'all, but I don't want to judge it before I get a chance to hear from the applicant or even any public that wants to speak today as well. So if there's no further questions from the staff, then I'd love to call the applicant up to make a presentation.
I need technical assistance, I'm sorry.
I got you.
I thought he was retired.
Good morning, Commissioners. For your record, I'm Russell Schropp with Henderson Franklin and my partner Richard Aiken here today on behalf of the applicant for this plan amendment. I'm here today with Steve Raleigh with SVR Management. They are the owner of the subject property. I'm also here. I'll be making the primary presentation, but I'm also here with the remainder of our team that's shown on the screen here. in case you'd like to get into greater depth on certain topics. Basic parcel information, the property that's the subject of the hearing today, as staff has indicated, is made up of 2 separate straps, combined about 35.5 acres. So this is a small-scale amendment, as Joe indicated. The property is located about a mile south of the Charlotte County line on the east side of Burnt Store Road. As you can see from the map or the aerial on the right top, that's project. Property is presently undeveloped. And the parcels are in the Burnt Store Planning District, shown in the light green color on the map below. This is an area that has not received a whole lot of planning and zoning activity in recent years, or ever since the plan was adopted, pretty much. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in depth later. As staff indicated, the amendment property is presently designated open lands on the Lee Plan future land use map. The request would designate about 33.5 acres as central urban and would recognize about 2 acres of the property as wetlands based on its environmental characteristics. There is a companion plan development zoning request that will help ensure protection of the wetland and environmental features on the site. The effect of this plan amendment will basically be to increase the allowable density from 1 unit per 10 acres to 10 units per 1 acre with a bonus density of up to 15, and it will allow for additional non-residential and commercial uses and intensities. At first appearance, this may really seem to be a substantial jump in the density and intensity of this property on the future land use map. But for reasons that I'll get into and that are covered in the staff report very well, the Burnt Store Road corridor, which I'll refer to as the BSR corridor for short, is an area where there is going to be a significant increase in development anticipated and planned for that area. As I mentioned, the property is in the Burnt Store Planning District, which is in the northwest corner of Lee County, unincorporated Lee County. Historically, there's been very little land use planning and zoning activity up there. A few adjustments were made about 10, 12 years ago, I think, in the Burnt Store Marina Village project, which is a development that actually got started in the early 1980s and has densities that I think exceed the open lands classification. But I think it's accurate to say that the BSR corridor is kind of primed right now to experience additional growth in the near future based on several factors. First of all, there is a utility agreement in place between Lee and Charlotte counties and also between Charlotte and Cape Coral that has resulted in the extension of sewer, water, and reclaimed water lines along BSR adjacent to this property. Secondly, as staff mentioned, there are some ongoing planned improvements to Burnt Store Road that will widen Burnt Store to 4 lanes from US 41 in Charlotte County all the way down through Charlotte, through Lee, all the way down to Pine Island Road. And thirdly, there are some very significant planning efforts underway in the city of Cape Coral that will direct substantial new growth to the BSR corridor. And I want to talk about each of these factors separately, just briefly, if I may. So I mentioned the utility agreement that was entered into in 2016 between Charlotte and Lee. This map shows the area that was the subject of that agreement. As you can see, it extends from the Charlotte County line down to unincorporated Lee County. The subject property of this plan amendment is pretty much right smack in the middle of it. And as I mentioned, a similar agreement was entered into between Charlotte and the city of Cape Coral to provide services to land within the city along BSR, Burnt Store Road. Under that agreement, sewer, water, and reclaimed water lines have already been extended southerly from the Charlotte County line past the subject property, and they have recently been put into service. The end result is that there are utility lines available and in use adjacent to the subject property. These lines were oversized to accommodate additional development, and capacity is available from Charlotte County utilities. Mentioned the Burnt Store Road expansion. In addition to utilities, as I'm sure you're aware, Burnt Store Road is undergoing expansion from 4 lanes from Pine Island Road all the way up to US 41 in Charlotte County. The expansion included in Lee County designating this roadway as a controlled access roadway. And I should note that there are designated access points that align with the subject property on both its north and south boundaries. So that has been accommodated. As far as timing of Burnt Store Road, the map on the left shows the timing for the segment that runs through Charlotte County from 41 on the north down to the Lee County line, and on the right, the segment of the 4-laning from the county line down to Pine Island Road. The subject property fronts on the segment between Van Buren Parkway and the Charlotte County line, and that is currently, I believe, under PD&E by Florida DOT. And finally, with regards to transportation, there was a traffic analysis prepared for this plan amendment by TR Transportation and reviewed by staff. The key takeaways from that study are that the level of service will be acceptable in both the short-range 2026 timeframe and the long-range 2045 projections. There is sufficient capacity available to accommodate this plan amendment, and no modifications to the short-term capital improvement plan or the LRTP, long-range transportation plan, are needed as a result of this amendment. Briefly, other public services shown on this slide are available and adequate, have been reviewed: police, fire, EMS, schools, solid waste. There is no transit out to this area. As staff mentioned, we're not in the flood zone, and we're also not in the coastal high hazard areas, so these issues are not an impediment to increased density brought by this plan amendment. There was some preliminary discussion here before I got up about the planning recommendations. The staff report does recommend adoption as being consistent with the Lee plan. Infrastructure is in place to support the proposed densities, and the proposed density is consistent with the comp plans of adjacent jurisdictions, primarily the city of Cape Coral. The LPA did vote 3-3, but three members were clearly in favor of the plan amendment to Central Urban, but I think a clear majority did recognize that an increase in density intensity was probably warranted in this area, and as Dave Loveland mentioned, it's a matter of really timing and whether you look at current conditions or whether what's going to happen in the future. So, one of the things that, in looking back at the LPA hearing, that frankly, I think one of the things that I didn't explain very well was the relationship of the county's plan for the Burnt Store Road corridor relative to the plans of other jurisdictions, notably the city of Cape Coral. So I would like to spend just a couple more slides on that relationship. So this is a slide that shows the BSR corridor from, I think, Diplomat Parkway north to the Charlotte County line. The white or the uncolored area is the city of Cape Coral. For unincorporated Lee County, you can see that the BSR's corridor is a mix of open lands, wetlands, and preservation on the east side of Burnt Store Road. The subject property, by the way, is marked by a red X there. And the west side of Burnt Store Road is just south of the county line is, of course, the Burnt Store Marina. And as I mentioned, this project was originally approved in the early 1980s. But it's, even the Burnt Store Marina Village project is a mix of rural, outlying suburban, and has a special category called Burnt Store Marina Village, and you can see the densities and intensities that were approved under that. The only other Lee plan classification, I would note there's a small enclave within the city. You can see it there. It's kind of colored pink, and I think that's actually intensive development on the Lee plan. Now, this is the same map, but we've injected the Cape Coral comprehensive plan map for the area along Burnt Store Road. And you can see some pretty significant differences. The Cape is actually planning for significant growth along the BSR corridor. You can see the frontage along Burnt Store Road is designated in the Cape's plan for mixed-use development. That's the orange color that you see there, which allows up to 25 dwelling units per acre and a 1.0 FAR. The Commercial Activity Center, which is the three areas colored light purple there. Allows up to 20 dwelling units per acre and a max FAR of 2.0. There's some multifamily colored brown on the Cape Coral map that allows up to 25 dwelling units per acre. And also there's some commercial professional areas designated red that you can see on the map there, which allows a commercial FAR of 1.0. So these are some significant densities and intensities, and one of the things that the statute, the Planning Act, does require is your consideration and coordination with the plans of adjacent local governments. And so I would suggest that the comp plan designations for Cape Coral in this area clearly contemplate densities and intensities that are at least comparable with central urban, and frankly, I would suggest they actually exceed what central urban would allow under the LEED plan to a large extent. Lastly, with regard to the Cape, I'll mention there are two pending zoning changes within the city of Cape Coral. They're moving forward with implementing the comp plan changes that they've adopted. The first change is the Burnt Store Road zoning district, or BURST, which I think staff mentioned at the beginning. That's shown in the cross-hatching in purple on this map, and is directly across the street from the subject of this plan amendment. The map on the right covers the BSR corridor between Calusa Parkway and Van Buren Parkway. The map on the left covers from, I think, Van Buren or Calusa north to the Charlotte line. The second, and this zoning change will allow comparable densities to the comp plan. It basically implements the comp plan changes in the Cape. The second change that's pending in zoning in the Cape is a plan unit development called Hudson Creek, which is on the east side of Burnt Store Road within this corridor. This is a project, is a significant mixed-use project. You can see the parameters on the last two lines there of the slide. 1,700 acres, 3,500 dwelling units, 800 bed ALF, and 575,000 square feet of office and hotel. The point here is that the Cape is moving forward with implementation of its planning efforts to facilitate a much more intense development corridor along Burnt Store Road than what is presently contemplated by the LEED plan designation. Basically, that's my presentation. The staff report and our planning analysis would encourage adoption of this plan amendment. The amendment would be consistent and compatible with what's being planned in the city of Cape Coral. There are urban levels of service available and adequate, including water and sewer. Burnt Store Road is being expanded to 4 lanes and will operate at acceptable levels of service. It's a controlled access road, and the property has directional access to the site. And finally, the property is using the concurrent plan development zoning process to ensure environmental features on the site are being protected. With that, I'd request adoption of this small-scale amendment, and we are available for any questions. Thank you for your time.
Any questions for the applicant at this time, commissioners? Okay, thank you very much. At this time, I'll go ahead and call for public comment then on this application. Has anyone come to speak in public comment on the Burnt Store Road application today? Okay, I see no public comment then, so we'll move back to the board for discussion. You know, I typically like to talk last, but I wanted to kind of share my thoughts on this one. This is in District 4 here. You know, I think if we could pull back up that aerial real quick, is that possible? It would help just my comments make a little more sense too. I wish this was on the west side of Burnt Store Road because I actually, looking at the future land use category, believe that it's currently categorized correctly as open lands. If you look at the parcel here, so you can zoom in a little bit here so that we can, this is all preserve. It's the Yucapens Preserve. It's a state-owned preserve conservation that, you know, basically the Burnt Store Road seems to be the western boundary of that. And while I know this parcel isn't in that preserve, it is categorized as open lands and directly next door to it. And so, you know, I understand the amount of intensity and density that's going to grow on the west side and to the south of it. And I actually think it appears appropriate, but making this change would reclassify land that is currently classified as open land. It would create an enclave of a different land use category on the east side of Burnt Store Road that currently doesn't appear to exist in that area. And maybe the county attorney can address that. This is really our phase, our chance in the process to kind of direct what that future land use should look like, right?
Right.
I mean, is that how, that's the difference between what we're doing here with a comprehensive plan amendment versus a zoning, right?
Right.
So, you know, I mean, in a comprehensive plan amendment, you actually get to look at the categories of the future land use map and make a legislative determination on whether you want that land to potentially be commercial someday or to remain open lands or ag or whatever, you know. And just for me personally, at this phase, looking at it, I believe it's currently categorized correctly as open lands. I understand the utility connections and the amount of development that will come on the western side of the road and in the boundaries of the city of Cape Coral. And I think that was a really smart way to look at it too, by the way. I absolutely understand why this was a 3-3 vote at the LPA, because you could argue it both ways, I think, all day long. But those are my comments. And, you know, as the chair, I don't make motions, so I'll listen to what the discussion is.
If I may go ahead and speak, Chairman?
Yeah.
About it. And that's exactly why I tried to make the point earlier. The issue that we run into, obviously, is there has to be a certain amount of lands that are preserved and kept rural. But unfortunately, with expansions that happen in certain areas, the BOCC City, for example, you still, you know, when those things happen, we have to allow for services and development. And I understand that there's still going to be open lands there, and there should be, but on that road, if you own property that is on that road, I'm just in the belief that you should have the options, because that is going to be the use of the land that is on that road. We're expanding that road for a reason. You see the growth of what Cape Coral is doing, which unfortunately makes sense. So I'm going to make a motion to adopt.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion for adoption from Commissioner Greenwell and a second from Commissioner Pendergrass. Do we have further discussion on the motion? Commissioner Sandelli?
I always put a lot of value in what the LPA says, and I always like when the LPA bounces up against our rules and stuff, because they're a valuable tool for us. So I was a little disheartened when I saw the split, but it caused some of the issues that we have. The reality, though, is that we're looking at the Burnt Store, you know, thoroughfare, as Commissioner Greenwell says, and we're expanding that road for a reason. You know, and Charlotte County is a recipient of that, and so on and so forth. So I think that corridor is very important. We're making decisions based on the expansion of that corridor over time. So I agree. I think that's it's going to be important to us long term.
Any further discussion on that item then? No? Okay. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. Are there any objections to the motion on the floor? Okay, show that it carries 4-1. The chair objects. All right. Is there any further business before us, Mr. Mora?
No, sir.
All right. We are adjourned.
Hold on. For clarification or direction from the board as to whether, for these fringe areas, you know, near the cities, should we be looking closer at what the cities are planning to do? You know, Commissioner Pendergrass had referenced the annexation dilemmas that we face sometimes where people want to annex in the cities to intensify. So we're comfortable with us doing that?
That's probably a better workshop discussion to have than on this specific case today at this hearing, but I do think that that'd be a good workshop discussion to have. Commissioners, you agree?
I agree.
I think so, you know. But yeah, I mean, like I said, I don't think there was anything wrong with the reasoning today. It was good. I understand why it was a 3-3. It made sense. I just went the other way, that's all. But all right, I appreciate you guys. Thank you, and we're adjourned.